So, Simon, what is the Future Britain project?
Well, about a year ago, the London School of Economics decided that it was important that there be a comprehensive consensus-building exercise to find a way through for constitutional reform. A year ago, of course, the government wasn't committed to constitutional reform. We had no hope that the government was going to do so under the Blair administration. And the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives are going in separate directions. So what we did was to start the process of bringing people together, bringing parties together to see how we could move forward. In doing so, we ended up with an unprecedented coalition of constitutional reform practitioners and political parties, and the whole idea is to see how we can build the process stage for constitutional reform.
Great. So how do you envisage this reform working in practice?
Well, part of our problem is trying to get a handle on what the government intends to do or what the government's options are. And we have been in conversation with government, and in fact the government co-launched the Future Britain initiative a couple of months ago. But I think the problem is that people aren't, because this hasn't happened before, we don't quite know what the expectations should be.
Sure.
And we're trying to sort of get to a point where we're saying, look, what is it we're trying to achieve? Now we think that in the first instance it's likely to be a British statement of values. Okay, that will form the bedrock possibly for a Bill of Rights, and then something broader. Well, okay, well if we're talking about that and we're having, let's say, a national conversation, well what is it to have a national conversation? Now I think our first step as Future Britain is to work with all the parties, to work with the public and the stakeholders to ask the key question: how do we engage the public? Now we think that the most important first step is to develop a set of principles that can be tested, not just PR principles, but principles that can be materially tested for results. You know, how do you engage? To what extent? There's a digital divide we have to consider. You know, some people are online, some are offline. The quality of the offline communication has to be materially as strong and as good. And so it's that sort of thing, I think, the bedrock, if you like, the bedrock principles. Once we've got those in place, we can start to engage.
Okay. Isn't there, though, a danger that if you give the public a greater say in things like this, that we might end up washing down human rights legislation, having fewer safeguards and so on?
There's always been a fear of if you like, the mob. You know, it's the same fear that sort of said, look, if you have a referendum over capital punishment, that you're going to end up with hangings on every street corner. I'm not entirely sure that that's going to work. If you were to have a snap referendum tomorrow and to say to people, do you want, let's say, lifetime imprisonment for burglars, you might get a proportion, quite possibly large, who would say, well, I want the sentences stiffer and the judges' wings to be clipped when it comes to being lenient. However, on a broader issue of human rights, if you had a national conversation that was educational, that was instructive, that was consensus building, that was attempting to achieve an intelligent and informed result, I don't think it's going to go in that direction. I think if anything, it's going to strengthen human rights, because people will understand the repercussions of the questions they're considering.
Okay, so finally, what's the next step from here?
Well, we're planning on holding our first advisory group meeting to settle on the first report, and that first report is going to be on these bedrock principles for engaging the public in a national conversation. I would hope that by the first week of October, possibly October 7th, the opening of Parliament, we'll have a report for public distribution that will say, here is stage one, here's the starting gun for how we proceed with the national conversation. That is, as we see it, the first and possibly the most important thing we have to do, and we've already started that process.
Brilliant, thank you very much.